right. Cool. I hope this talk is going to be entertaining. I haven't run through it yet, so I don't know how long it is. And I've never been asked to give a tech talk, so this is very different for me. So a lot of this actually is going to be about weird, floaty, conceptual stuff. So I actually don't know most of you, which is funny for me giving a talk in New York, which is great. If you don't know who I am, I fantastically have included this tiny little section of crap. I do a lot of different things. I've done like large-scale interactive artworks. I've done weird little chat software online. I've made interactive sculptures for galleries and museums. I've made aggressive books that take advantage of the interactions we have with books. I've made strange art games, and I've made totally normal video games. And I've also made a board game, which will come back around later. So I'm not going to go into too much of that stuff, and maybe some things will come up later with Andy, but I would end up doing a whole presentation on like crap that I've done if I was going to go into that. So anyway, when I was asked to do this tech talk like a month ago, it was right in the middle of this really crazy crunch time that I was working on this game called Ridiculous Fishing with my friend Greg Woolwind, who had come into town, and it was like 30 days in a row, and we thought it was going to be 5, but it ended up being 30 of like crazy 12-hour days. And I don't know if you guys have done crunch times like that before. I had never done anything quite that intense, but basically what happens is you get to having these really deep conversations with the other person because you're seeing them all the time every day, and you're working on like really intense stuff. And one topic that we ended up talking about sort of very conveniently around the time that Ben emailed me was work philosophy. And so I was working on this game, Ridiculous Fishing, with this guy, Greg Woolwind. And we started talking about work philosophy, and we started thinking about like different methods of working and how we work. So like I know a lot of people who use like the Pomodoro technique to get focus. And a lot of times when I've had these kind of conversations with indies, it's about that kind of thing. It's like, what trick do you use to get your brain into focusing and doing stuff? But it was kind of interesting talking to Greg, because Greg actually mentioned this thing, the Tao Te Ching, that he discovered in college. And that was sort of the thing that was his thing to think about and when he thought about work habits. Greg talked really hard about how he would sort of care and not care about his work and how that kept him focused and comfortable. This sort of state of being attached and detached at the same time. And so he sent me this thing today when I was asking for him to like excerpt a segment of this. He said this set of statements. So like easy promises make for little trust. Taking things lightly results in great difficulty. Because the sage always confronts difficulties, he never experiences them. So the whole book is this sort of set of paradoxes, but they're about being comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time. And that's how Greg works. He has this idea. And I think it was kind of interesting, because this was one of the first times I've really had this conversation about like how we work and how you do focus with another indie when they hadn't brought up a specific technique, when they actually brought up a philosophy. And I was trying to think about why that might have been, because for me it is sort of a more philosophical thing than a technique. I've never used Pomodoro. And I think it was because for Greg and I, we both have this like very obsessive focus. Like when we're working on something, it's like total blinders on, and we're just focusing on getting that one thing done. So for us, finding like the ability to get work done was never the problem. It was more like, where do we direct that focus, and how do we become comfortable with getting all of this work done and not paying attention to other stuff? So for me, the philosophy that I kind of subscribe to, coming from the art world and having gotten weird readings in art history classes, is Solowit's sentences on conceptual art. They're sort of like my religious text, per se. So Solowit was a conceptual artist, and he made all these really beautiful works that relate pretty heavily to computer art contemporarily, because many of them are instruction-based. So many of them are things where he would just write a number of sentences, and the sentences were instructions, and then he would rent the piece out. He had a lot of notions about how art worked and about how commerce worked that were really radical for his time. And he would rent the piece out, and he would have his studio go, and a couple of people who worked for him would then follow the instructions and paint it on the wall. And then when they were done, they would erase the whole thing. So the piece was really the set of instructions. But he also, because he was such an involved thinker in his times, he wrote a lot. And one of the things he wrote that I think is really beautiful is this sentences on conceptual art. If you've never read them, I totally recommend it. Don't worry, though, because I'll cover a couple of them, and they all kind of nicely encapsulate themselves, so it doesn't really matter if you haven't read it. But if you like the stuff that I end up saying, you should probably check it out, because it only takes like 10 minutes to read, and then you think about it forever, which is like Othello. So let me just dive right in. OK, so I think there are 36 or 37 statements in the sentences, and I'm only going to point out a couple. Let's see, where am I? All right, so I'll just go through them, and then I'm going to sort of talk about them. So the few that I want to pick out kind of right at the beginning that I think are really important are second one, which is rational judgments repeat rational judgments. Irrational judgments lead to new experience. Irrational thoughts should be followed absolutely and logically. And if the artist changes his mind midway through the execution of a piece, he compromises the result and repeats past results. So really what this stuff is about for me is it's about inspiration and sort of respecting inspiration and respecting the subconscious mind when you're doing work. Like the subconscious mind, at least from my perception of it, is way better at connecting thoughts and imbuing deeper meaning, which is like how many things does this one thing that you made actually relate to when you think about it, than the conscious mind. The conscious mind is all this sort of logical argument, and I think when stuff comes out of the conscious mind, it very often is sort of like it feels sort of fake, or it's just sort of a shell. It's not really this like deeper object that has networked connections to things all over your brain. So the idea is that, like, as a creator, I think it's really imperative that we follow fascination. For me, fascination or love is sort of this mental process that when you find things that you love and you follow them through, what you're doing is you're taking these irrational judgments that you're making and you're following them. You're just respecting these irrational judgments, because there's not much more irrational than love. And this happened to me really recently, actually, with a project. So it's kind of convenient because I can actually give you a really solid example of when this worked out in my benefit. I was working on this game, Guts of Glory, with my friends Jesse Fuchs and Jess Warby. And the game is really this like bizarre board game. It's a eating contest, but it takes place in the post-apocalypse. So it's a post-apocalyptic game with cards. But it's in a post-apocalypse that's not really like any post-apocalypse you've ever seen in a book or on TV, because it's a post-apocalypse where it's bizarre and strange and surreal, and everybody's competing for glory by eating. Or at least our joke is that you're competing for glory by eating, and since we don't really know if anybody else is alive, then you could say people compete for that. And the world, because it's a card game, is really made up of things on cards. And when we were coming up with all the items on the cards, because for us that's world building, you know, we're not writing a novel about this, we're not telling, the only tools we have to teach people about this world are the objects in the game and the rules that are going on. So when we were coming up with cards, it was really important to me that all the cards kind of fit together and that the cards drive this kind of larger narrative. And the way that we decided to do that was we would just run everything sort of through my comfort level with the objects. There was no logical thing. We didn't sit down and write out a backstory. Just every time we came up with a card, we would go like, okay, Zach, does this make sense? Does the name make sense? Does it fit with what it does? Can you sort of feel like it's comfortable? So I was running everything through this like very irrational subconscious right and wrong. So we created this kind of world filled with things that we didn't really understand, but they all felt comfortable together. So an example is like the lipstick card. So this is a card where you eat it and it lets you steal a chew from an opponent's card and put that card on one of your own cards. Why does that happen when you eat lipstick? I have absolutely no idea. There's like no logical statement where you could go, oh, well, you know, if you put lipstick on, then your food gets chewed more and your opponent's gets chewed. Like, it doesn't make sense, but it sort of felt comfortable. And we went through a lot of iterations with this card of like, what would a card with this power be called and what should that look like? And weeks after we'd sort of finished all of the cards, we were trying to make some special cards for the Kickstarter because we'd done a Kickstarter for this project. And when we were coming up with those cards, we came up with the powers first. And so this card was a really interesting one because we came up with the power that it would let you feed any card from the discard pile. And for me, that just like immediately seemed like this very strange power. Like it didn't fit any of the rules that we already had in this world. Unlike Magic the Gathering, there was no like pulling stuff out of the discard pile. It was, you know, your discard pile is the things that you've chewed and swallowed. So what does that mean when you take something out of the discard? And one of the things that we had when we were making it was there are all sorts of like sort of in-jokes and weird little things when you look through the cards about like maybe how the world got this way. Like, why are we in a post-apocalyptic space? Why do people compete for food? You know, there were pills that looked like maybe they could cause zombies. There's like psychic energy abilities. There's like kind of all these different things that would destroy the world if they were there, but no clear explanation as to what actually happened. And so as I was thinking more about this card, it sort of felt really special. Like it felt like there was something here that would actually tie something together just with the power alone. And Jesse ended up coming up with this really great name for it, the desideratum, which is like the root of desire. It's this thing that gives you the thing, hold on, about the thing that you would want. And the more I thought about this card and talked it over with the other two guys, the more I realized that there was this really strange sort of connection to like my personal past that this card sort of brought up, and I had no idea it wasn't designed for. Jesse, I think, actually came up with the power for this card. And that connection is broccoli. Because when I was really little, I had this story that my mom told me that I did, and maybe I remember it, maybe I don't, I'm not really sure. And the story goes that she had some broccoli on a plate and she was going to eat it. And so she offered it to me because it was dinner time and I was sitting there, and she said, do you want to eat this? And I said, no. And then so she ate it. And then I said, actually, I really want to eat that. And then she was like, well, you can't. I ate it. And I was like a baby, so probably my sentences were not as eloquent. But I started crying, and I was very upset that I couldn't eat this broccoli that she had previously offered to me because she had eaten it. And I think that's like a really basic lesson that everybody kind of learns at some point, is this like lesson of loss. When something's gone, you can't have it anymore. And it just so happened that my lesson happened to come through food. And it was like this weird food connection to this world that like, sure, okay, now we have this thing that would actually undo that lesson for me. Like in this world, if it was me and I had that moment and I wanted that broccoli, I could have played the desideratum and then I could have eaten the broccoli. And like, what a fucked up world that would have created. Like, to live in a space where you could have anything you wanted and you could get back the things that other people ate and then you could eat them. And it kind of realized that like this could be the thing that screwed up everything. Like just this one little rule of reality, if you bend it, it creates this terrible, horrible, weird world. And what does that world look like? It kind of looks like the world that we created when we were coming up with all these cards. And after we kind of came to this conclusion, my friend Jess was like, oh, I wish we designed for this. Like, that would be so cool if we designed for this. And I kind of feel like we did sort of design it. Like, we designed the game by following this strange subconscious process of just following our fascination and trying to make things comfortable. And it was really cool to be able to discover that and navigate through that. So this is a really big one for me on the sentences. And to kind of bring it back to tech, when I do programming, I operate in a really similar way. I have this idea of like, I want to follow my irrational thoughts to a functional object as quickly as possible. The most important thing for me when I make games or art or projects isn't graphics, it's not audio, it's not high-level math, it's not solving problems intelligently. It's really just how can I get the thing that I just thought of into the real world as quickly as possible so I can actually interrogate it in a real, meaningful way and not just in like a theoretical way. So that means a lot of things. It means I don't like refactoring my code. I never recode things, ever. And that is horrible when you actually release real code and games to people. It's an absolute nightmare working with people on projects because they have to read through like junk and comments all the time. But for me, I can't do it. I can never recode anything. And so because of that, because I like to make work and have it done as fast as possible, and not done in like a temporary way, done in like a real way. Like I could put it in a museum, or I could release it on the iPhone, you know, like really, really done. That's why I really like C++, and I work a lot in C++ and open frameworks. Open frameworks is really convenient for this type of work because it straddles the line between sort of power and accessibility. You could say something like processing is easier to write in, it's easier to prototype, but the trade-off you get for that is then later you usually have to optimize a lot, or you have to recode your thing for a different environment. You could argue that I should use something like Unity because Unity works across everything. I'll never, ever have to recode. But the problem with me in Unity is that you sort of lose the process of experimenting with code. It's too high level. You end up taking the idea that you want and then the tools that Unity gives you, and then you kind of mash them up and you adjust your code to fit the things that Unity will let you do. And that is like the exact opposite of what this is. That's taking your irrational and analyzing it with the rational and turning it into something perfect. So for me, open frameworks, this is a terrible picture, but I actually owned these blocks, so I felt like I had to put it in. I found it on Google. So for me, open frameworks is really direct. And I code in like a really stripped down, dumb version of C++. I don't use anything complicated. I don't use templates. I don't even know how templates work. I don't use any fancy memory management. I don't use boost libraries and pointers. I don't use events. I use global variables. They're terrible, but I use them. But I do it because for me, it feels like I'm cobbling together the thing I'm making out of pieces that are like just simple enough. You know, I'm making things out of wood blocks. I'm not making things out of Legos, which are great and slightly more complicated, you know, and have their own rules. But I'm also not going out in the woods and chopping down trees and making my own toys. Like I have this sort of perfect medium. And when you think about wood blocks, like wood blocks are great because the only rule is physics, right? It has to work in the real world, and that's it. That's the only rule you have. So that was a little bit scattered. But I want to end with just a couple more sentences from the end of Solowit's piece that I think are pretty relevant both to my practice and in working all over the map, but also I think they're general advice for creatives. So one of them is, banal ideas cannot be rescued by beautiful execution. You've probably heard that before. It's weird to cough into a microphone. It's difficult to bungle a good idea. And then my favorite is, when an artist learns his craft too well, he makes slick art. And that's a really biting way of saying, don't ever get too good at what you're doing. Don't get too comfortable. That's all I prepared, so we can talk, I guess.
So you guys always throw me off. You come up with these like grand titles, and then I write a bunch of stuff, and then halfway through you're talking like scratching it all out. I'm like, nothing. All of this doesn't matter. Let me see where I can start this off. So you say a lot of stuff about technology and how you use it and how it influences your work. The thing that interests me about that the most is that you just basically said that you love using C++.
Yeah.
But I also know that you're working on a Unity project.
Yeah.
Which you conveniently omitted from what you just talked about. So can you talk a little bit more about how you why you like using?
Yeah, sure.
Or how these tools come into play.
Well, I mean, first, wow. There's some people in my mind right now. I would never, ever use Unity for anything experimental. Like, it would never happen. Like, and I think the project that I'm doing in Unity is very rote. It's like, I'm excited about some of the sort of high-level stuff and I wish I could really talk more directly about what I'm doing, but like,
I just have to be careful what we talk about.
It's okay. I mean, well, so the project is like an RPG, which like, fucking who doesn't want to make an RPG? And it's like, there's stuff in it that I'm sort of experimenting at on a high level, like how an RPG could function in a certain context, and like what like with like time restraints for like and contextual restraints. It's so hard to talk about this without while being vague. But the point is, like, the project itself, it's like a project of a certain scope. It's beyond the scope of anything that I would talk about here. Like, it's a 2-year project, so there's no way that any component of it is going to be something that I can sit down and like follow my imagination to wherever it leads, because there are other people on the project, and it's going to take a really long time, and like it's just sort of a different type of project. I think it's a really much more rote kind of video game, which is something that I want to explore.
So you're saying the exploration of your design is not on the ground level,
Right. Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, I think the actual functionality of making the thing work is not what I'm interested at this point. Like, I don't care quite so much about how the controls feel. I mean, I do, it needs to work, but it's not experimental. Whereas, like, in a game like BitPilot, which is a game that I had previously made, which was all about like exploring action controls on an iPhone. Like, how do you do an action game where you can play it by feel and not understand what your hands are doing when you can't feel anything because there are no buttons? Like, that's a game that, like, for this approach was perfect, because, like, all right, how do I, I have an idea, let me just execute it, and I don't want to think about it because I don't know enough about the space to even make a call on something like that. Whereas this game, like, I have some lessons from other things. But I would also say, though, I think this is a stupid idea. Like,
what's the stupid idea?
Well, Unity is like an okay idea, but I'm really freaked out about how that's going to change my process, and I don't know. Maybe this game is going to suck because, like, I don't. And then the other thing is, like, also, I think working for 2 years on a game is stupid. Like, I think that's a bad idea, and I would not encourage anyone to do that. If you really know what you're doing, it's a good idea. But working a really long time on something is like a really specialized skill, like way more specialized than you'd ever imagine. Ridiculous Fishing, the game that we just crunched on forever, like, was the first real content-based game I'd ever done, and it was way more work than anybody expected.
But Terry Kavanaugh just went on record saying that he can't work on anything for more than 6 months.
Yeah, I think that's
awesome.
awesome.
It took him 6 months, and that was a pain.
Yeah, I've never worked on anything for more than 6 months that was actual functional work. Ridiculous Fishing took 2 years, but we weren't working for most of that, and like, that was mostly we were just depressed, and Guts of Glory has taken almost a year, but most of that wasn't design. Most of that was actually dealing with manufacturing and getting Kickstarter working, and, like, there was design spiced in.
So why in heaven's name would you take yourself out of that comfortable space where you are with, like, prototyping, right?
Because I've never done it before.
Okay, let me finish my thought. Like,
okay.
What you're saying is that you love open frameworks,
Yeah.
and you love rapid prototyping, and you love doing that up to, like, day 0, like up to release, because
Right.
you never want to leave prototyping.
Yeah.
You kind of already preempted now, but so basically you're saying, I'm very comfortable in that space. Is that your perfection? Is that the art that you're getting?
No, I mean, I don't think there is. Yeah, I think so. Like, I don't think I would like to have a perfection.
So your DIY method of hacking is something that you've gotten too good at. So you're making slick hacks?
Maybe, yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's probably not. Probably not. But I try to do a lot of different things, especially with games. Like, I did a puzzle game, and then I did an action game, and then I did a card game that will probably never get released, and then I did a word game, and then I did a board game, and, like, all these things are so totally different.
So now you have to do.
Now I kind of want to do like an RPG. Yeah. And that's the different thing. Like, I'm not going to, I would love to actually, and also, I would have loved to do it in open frameworks, but it needs 3D physics for a certain component of it, and I'm not gonna write that. I don't know that kind of math.
You know the guy who knows physics.
But
he never delivers, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to get him to do work.
We still have an idea that we.
Yeah,
let's not go there tonight. No. So.
Yeah, no, I don't think I can give you a good answer. I think, like, I'm exploring.
I'm scared that it's going to be like my book project for you, right? That I'm going to tell you now to not do it, and you'll do it, and halfway through it, you'll be like, well, maybe I should have done. But anyway, like, let's.
Yeah, that might
not
happen.
linger
But
on it.
I'm working on like 3 or 4 other projects at the
idea.
same time.
Yeah, we're well surprised. I'm happy you're doing it. I'm curious to see what.
This must be really vague for all of you.
Well, it's conceptual.
Okay.
Are you the only coder on the project?
Yeah, right now.
Why in heaven's name? Okay, let's not go there. Why? So for me, Unity makes sense if you're sharing the coding load.
Right.
And also if you're very content heavy, which you probably are. Okay, let's leave it at that for now.
Okay.
The next thing I'd like to talk about is you brought up that fifth point in the sentences, which I think is a really good one, right? The one that irrational thought should be followed absolutely and logically, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense to have the irrational thought, but then once you have it, you should be logic about it, or you should at least follow it through. And you talked about guts of glory in that context, but you kind of also, it feels to me that when you were working on Spell Tower, like the impetus for making that game came from a similar space.
Right.
Maybe, right? Because again, you've been interviewed about this multiple times, like on the Origins, which made for an amazing story, obviously, which was that Zach hates spelling bees, right? And that his hatred for that is what spurred the idea to then follow through with that. Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think like...
So for those of you who don't know, Spell Tower is a Tetris-like spell words game where the blocks disappear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really like a perfect example in like a lot of ways. Spell Tower is a perfect example of this, not just in the follow through, but in like how it happened. Because like the initial impetus for it was I was at IndieCade and somebody had seen Asher Vollmer's Puzzle Juice, and she came up to me and was like, "This guy made this game, and it's like Boggle plus Tetris." And I imagined Spell Tower, and then I saw his game and was like, "Oh, that's different. I'll make mine." And I don't like word games, and I made it, and I was like, this thing sucks. But I made exactly what I imagined, and then I played it, and I was like, this is absolutely terrible. And then I brought it home, and I showed it to two friends, and they were like, this is great. And like, if I'd sat down and been like, this is terrible, like, how do I make this better, like, before I ever had a functioning product, like, it never would have ended up like it did. And I only went back into it because I had two friends who said, this is great, and I went, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, something interesting is here. How do I discover what is interesting? How do I turn this into something where I understand why they like it and I don't, and like merge it so that I like it and they like it? Like, how do I build that?
Please, that's an interesting sentence. What exactly happened?
Well, so then it actually did get fairly logical, except for bursts of like illogicalness. So like where it started was, so I showed it to my two friends and they were like, this is great. And I went, well, I don't understand word games then. Like, why do you like this stuff? And I don't like it. And then I went to all my friends and I went, what are your favorite word games? And then they told me, and I played all of them. And I was like, these are all terrible. And then why do you like them? And then they would tell me. And then I would go, oh, that's interesting. Like, that's not a thing that I like. Like, one of my friends liked Bookworm. And I was like, why do you like Bookworm? This is so stupid. And she goes, well, I like making the words, and then you get small rewards, and then you make more things, and the small rewards turn into big rewards, and then eventually they turn to gigantic rewards, and you play a game for 6 months, and you have all diamonds, and then you make a giant word. And I was like, that sounds like the worst game of all time. Like, I don't want to play that game. There's no skill. It's just grinding. But it was interesting to hear that and then look at other word games and realize that like most word games are just grinding. Like it's just like, here's a word. How many words can you make out of this word? Is that a game? I mean, it's a drill.
Did you manage to get to a point where you liked it?
Yeah, well, so what happened is once I learned that, I looked back at what I had done. And if you've played Spell Tower, what I made was essentially rush mode, but without the block line clearers, without the dark blocks, and without getting bonus letters eliminated around the edges. And I looked at it and I went, oh, all right, I kind of see this. Like, this is a grind game. There are just a lot of letters, and you spell words. Of course they would like that. But what they're actually getting is there is this other component. You know, there's this like spatial component that's there, and so they're looking at it and going, oh, it's a grinding game, but then there's also this thing I've never seen before. So I like this game. This is great and new. And I was looking at it going, well, here's this thing that I see all the time, and then this crap mechanic. And so what I did then was I sat down and I said, like, all right, well, how do I, where is this failing for me? When I think of Boggle Tetris, like, what's the stuff that's exciting? And Tetris, what's exciting about it for me is like the spatial mechanic, the fact that you have to, you have these things and that's fine, but really what's important is playing with space and understanding how space adjusts. To me, the funnest thing about Spell Tower was you would make a word to make some other blocks drop down that would let you make a new word. Like that was the coolest part for me. And so it was, all right, how do I build that up? How do I foreground that component, the spatial component? And so I just thought of like, okay, well, there are different things I could do. What if there were a lot of black squares that you just had to clear by being near them? Like, what if I steal that from drop 7? Or like, what if what if when you clear a word, so I did that, and I was like, all right, well, what if you clear extra squares? What are ways to clear more squares? Because I'm going to be introducing obstacles, and so if I introduce obstacles, you need a couple ways around them. Like your answer to an obstacle can't always be spell a word. So in a vertical space, what are my options? Well, okay, well, maybe I can have a block that clears a whole row. So that way, if you have a problem here, you can solve it here, and that will affect it. Or like, what if I have too many black squares or too many letters that I don't like? Is there a way to get rid of letters without using them that can be like really functional? And so, oh, sure, well, 5-letter words are hard. So if you make one of those, maybe that'll clear extra letters. And that'll let you, tweak the space some more. And then it was working pretty well, but it was really hard to ramp up the difficulty at that point. And my friend Jess would play, and he would play forever, and I would play for 5 minutes and lose. And I was like, all right, well, how do I, I need something granular here. And I had at that point sort of implemented puzzle mode at Adam's suggestion. I'd actually thought about puzzle mode. So in puzzle mode, every time you make a letter, it adds a row of letters. And in my own mind, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, that's 8 blocks. I can't spell 8-letter words all the time. Like, I'm always going to be in a losing battle. I'll lose really quickly. And when I tried it, it sucked. And then I tried, all right, well, maybe every 2 words it'll add a row. But that was too slow, and there was no granularity. But Adam was like, no, this is really cool. You should try this again. So I tried it again, and I gave it to Jess, and Jess could play forever where it would add a row. And then I was like, all right, I need more granularity than add a row or don't add a row. Then, how many black blocks are in there? It just doesn't work, because black blocks in Spell Tower are interesting because they don't just, they're not just an obstacle, they're also kind of a bonus, because if you make a word next to them, they always disappear. So they let you clear more space when you want to. And so what I then thought of was having the blocks with the requirements on them. So like a block that can only be used in a 4-letter word or a 5-letter word or a 6-letter word. And that ended up being really granular, because now you have these like little tiny components that you really have to think about. It's not just the broad strokes. There's like the micromanaging going on.
So the most fascinating thing about, for those of you who don't know, everything he's talking about here right now, he did all of this in the time span of 13 days. So all of this like thought that like if I hear this, it's like so high level. It's like it sounds like it's fairly detailed now, right? But when you came up with all this,
right,
you were asking yourself these what if questions. Like you just like brought up like a bunch of like what if this, what if that, what if that, what if that. Like you ask yourself all these questions within the time span of 13 days and made the game, like finished it and published it. Right? Like you didn't even, it wasn't even like halfway.
Yeah.
You didn't like finish a prototype in 13 days and then went on to polish it. You did all the art and all the concept and all the game design and all the coding, and everything.
Follow your rationality, absolutely.
So that
C++.
That leads me to the last part of my part, because I think I want to get to the audience faster, because there are way more people here than normally. So so I don't know if you're familiar. Before he wrote sentences in '69, Solowit wrote the paragraphs.
Right, totally not familiar. But go, let's hear it.
We could also talk about the value of academia, but whatever.
I could talk about that too.
No, let's not do that today. So one of the things he says, and this is in his paragraphs, is it's all on conceptual art, right? So conceptual art, this is where he defined conceptual art in '67, and
right, I'm really educated.
Yeah, he says it's where the idea, the concept, is the most important aspect.
Right.
Where basically, to continue quoting it, it says it means that all the planning and decisions are made beforehand and the execution is a perfunctory affair. And furthermore, it says it's usually free from the dependence, and it specifically uses the term usually, from the dependence on the skill of the artist as a craftsman. Right, so I think this is where your work and your let's say like cribbing from him, which I do freely just as much as you do, which I think is where we intersect, that's where it diverges from that entirely, right? Because you still, right, can you...
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the project. I think in general, I would say that that is a very like absolutist statement where I wouldn't make one, even though he's saying usually like that's pretty strict, and it feels to me like he's really talking about his own brand of conceptual work. Like he's really talking about his sentences right there, or not. Sorry, his wall drawings. Like he's really saying like this is what I'm going to do in the future. Like this is my wall drawings, and people will do them, and it doesn't matter, you know. And a lot of his work was spent trying to kind of like push exactly what he's saying there.
But this is a stream of consciousness.
But I do agree with some of it. I mean, I think, you know, in some contexts, like obviously when you're making a game, it does matter. You know, the idea is a tiny component. You know, you're following a number of irrational ideas, and you're working through lots of different things. And like, you know, there's an overall idea, and then there are sort of sub ideas and things you follow and test.
What I'm getting to is that you're not like your work is not purely generative.
No, but I think though there are things that I've done. Like I think Lose Lose does relate kind of to that statement. Like Lose Lose. So Lose Lose is this game that I did a couple years ago about digital. The importance that we place on digital things as they relate to the importance that we place on physical things, and just like making that really obvious. Like you really give a shit about your wedding photos, but you don't really give a shit about the wedding photos that you took of your wedding that are on your camera that you've never removed, and then you break your camera and you're sad. You know, like why that doesn't make sense. You know, these things are kind of the same, but because they're not physical. So I made this game where you would play and it would delete things on your hard drive if you played it. Because when you shot the aliens would die, and the aliens were connected to files, and the files would be deleted, and you'd never know what they were. So it was this like very risky sort of engagement. But the point of that game, though, and I think what relates to this is that like that game, like the execution doesn't matter.
That's true.
It's the idea, and it's that when people see it, they go, "Oh, what the hell? Why would you do something like that?" And then they talk about it or they think about it. You know, like a lot of that, even like Hit Counter, like other physical pieces that I made in museums, or Thoughts, which I was just showing, like those pieces are really about like going and having an experience, and then that experience being a catalyst for thoughts and conversations, and then those are the thing that I care about, that people are being curious and talking and having conversations with each other about a work and about an idea. And I think in a lot of those works, they really are what he's saying. Games for me are sort of different, because the games that I make aren't about exploring an idea. Like I don't want people to have a conversation about combining Tetris and Boggle. Like I don't care. That's not the point of Spell Tower. The point of Spell Tower is like it's a different angle on curiosity. It's that I want people who would just play some stupid game like Bookworm to pick up something like Spell Tower and learn to explore a system and learn the joy of like exploiting rules and discovering strategies and being curious in that way, because I think the way that we play games and the way that we're curious in games is very important, and it relates to a lot of other aspects in life. So I think there are sort of two sort of areas in the art that I'm doing. There's the super conceptual stuff where I'm making points about the system that we call life, that we're all exploring and trying to get people curious about that, and that relates to Soluit. And then there are the parts where I'm making games, and I'm using some of the ideas that he says, but really they're about you engaging your own curiosity in a system that I've built for you, as opposed to the larger system.
Well, you also use two job descriptions, right? Call yourself conceptual artist and game designer.
Yeah.
Like are those two things in harmony in your life? Or are they in constant competition? Do you feel that do they come together? Do they overlap?
I think for a while I was a little worried that I was making too many games, but not recently. Now recently I kind of feel a little bit better. I did some.
From designers a lot.
Yeah, I don't know.
Too many games.
Yeah, I mean, there was a period really last year where I wasn't doing a lot of art, but then this year I've done like a new piece and I had 2 shows, and that made me feel sort of more comfortable doing this stuff again. And I really do think they're different. They're just both explorations of systems, and so for me, exploring systems is fun, and it's different types of things. And I think they're both worthwhile. Like, I wouldn't say that the art is more worthwhile than the games. It's just like a personal comfort for me.
In closing for this part, I'm going to say that just because you just said his like when I quoted Soul, you said it was very prescriptive and was very kind of normative. So he finishes the paragraphs by saying that this is my current thinking. It's
Right.
subject to change.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I love that. It's perfect because you never. I mean, it's very out there.
Yeah, it's great. That's like why half the time I start talks, I go like, I just want to warn you, I just made all of this up. I don't know what I'm doing. This is the thoughts that I have had.
I'll leave that stand because we've had this conversation way too many times. Okay, I'm going to open it up to the audience. So let's start right. Oh yeah, we have a microphone, so maybe pass that around. Let's start
Hello. I'd like to hear more about what you're thinking of storytelling is, and how maybe, because in my mind, having played Spell Tower and seen some of your other games, there seems to be this use of the interface as a storytelling device, if not necessarily a narrative, but at least something that maybe, like you said, triggers conversation, or in other ways it maybe tells some sort of a story. Could you sort of talk a little bit about that, about how these devices become storytelling objects?
Yeah, sure, I can try. There are a couple different ways that I would want to go. I mean, I think for me, storytelling is much more about like a holistic experience with something than a particular story, which is why working on this RPG is going to be very strange and alien for me, and why I'm kind of excited about it. But like, I think the best example for me of like holistic storytelling is like Minecraft, I guess, because everybody has a very similar story of Minecraft every time somebody plays it. If you ask them, well, what was your first night and day in Minecraft like? It's almost the same for everybody, and they tell it like a story, but there's no story in Minecraft. Like, there's not even any text. Nobody tells you anything. There's no one to talk to. There's no piece of paper you find. You know, it's a survival story without the message in the bottle. It's just the survival part, and you learn it. And I think we tried to do a lot of that stuff with Guts too, even though there's sort of narrative stuff. There's also a lot of functional stuff with, like, you have a mouth, and the mouth is how many cards you have, and the cards you can swallow or you can spew them, and all of these things are like in-game actions with just a component. Like, you're competing for glory, and what does that even mean? Like, in the post-apocalypse, you're competing for glory, and the glory, you're walking along a road towards the sun, and like, there are all these sort of weird components that are fitting together in like a way that sort of works in your brain or not. I don't know if I'm answering this really well, and there was one other thread that I wanted to pick up, and I'm trying to remember what it was. I don't know. Does that help at all?
Well, I'm not looking for help.
Okay. Does that help answer your question? Does that help me?
I hope so. I don't know. Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes. Well, regarding the point of the what's that? A post-apocalyptic game?
Yeah, Guts of Glory.
Guts of Glory. Well, regarding the desideratum, like once you put something in the discard pile, you can never get it again unless you have the desideratum. Isn't that kind of like analogous to the phrase "you don't know what you got till it's gone," or more analogous to like the desideratum? Isn't that more analogous to like resurrecting something from the dead in other forms of say literature? And by the way, desideratum in Latin means something that is desired. For those who don't know.
Yes, actually, I think that's a great question, and I would say it actually has more to do with you never know what you have until you've lost it than it has to do with resurrecting something from the dead. Because I think not understanding something, like not losing something gives you an understanding of something that you wouldn't have had if you hadn't lost it. And that's an extraordinarily important component of learning and being alive and understanding the world. And I think the primary thing that the desideratum would fuck up in real life is no one would ever have that lesson. There's like a lesson that's missing there.
But you get it back from the discard pile. It's like
yeah, but it's gone though, and then you get it back, and then what if everybody could just get everything back? What if nothing was ever, no decision ever mattered? Because if I eat this or I don't, you can have it and eat it. Like, everything just goes out the window. It's just weird. It was weird for me to find something that was like such a simple thing to explain that just totally wrecked everything that I thought that underpinned everything that I thought.
But you never wrote it down, right? You didn't have, like, you said you never had a storyboard for this.
Right.
You just, like, it was all just something in you, and you queried that black box inside yourself.
Yeah.
Interesting.
When you're working on your more conceptual pieces, what comes first? Generally speaking, the broader concept, the higher level concept, or the more mechanical elements? I'm thinking specifically with Lose-Lose. Were you first thinking about the triviality of files, or were you thinking about, what about something that destroys your heart?
I was thinking about the triviality of files. I was like, this is, because so Lose-Lose came about when I was working on my thesis. And part of my thesis was a number of works that were looking at the internet as a physical place and trying to understand what that was like and to make points. Like a lot of my work treats the internet like it's a place that we actually live. And so I was having a really hard time getting that through to my professors, and in grad school they were like, well, you need to back this up with evidence or something. And I was like, how can I possibly do that? And then I was thinking about files, and I was thinking like, all right, how can I make this point extremely strongly? And I was like, oh, that's weird. There's this weird disconnect about files. And then I thought, wow, is there a game where you just destroy your computer? And then I Googled it, and it was shocking to discover that there wasn't. And then I thought, oh, how do I do that? Oh, I made the Space Invaders game a while ago with a friend that generated Space Invaders. So what if they just are generated off of your files, and then it deletes your files? So then I made that. And like the whole thing was like 3 hours from start to finish, and then I put it up, and I had no idea what it meant. I built it, and I wrote a paragraph about it where I tried to interrogate it. And then sort of over the next month or two of people talking about it on forums and stuff, I really honed in on like all the components of what was interesting about it for me.
Have you ever heard of Core Wars?
Core Wars, yeah. A lot of people talk. Core Wars is really cool. Very different. It's very cool.
Is that the one where you code?
Yeah, Core Wars is like the competitive hacking game, sort of. You're like building. So Core Wars, I'm pretty sure, is this game where you have like a memory space that's sort of virtual and fake, and you write a set of instructions that are loaded in, and so do a bunch of other people, and the instructions are like, move 5 steps, copy my instructions, move 5 steps, and so basically you're trying to take over the space with your set of instructions, and everybody else also has a set of instructions that are also trying to take over the space by like destroying your instructions after we had been at the IGF for it. So we had a game, we had a game that basically worked. And we thought, we just need to plug in some art and figure out how to have our friend do the XML editing to make the levels work. But the deeper we got into it, the more we sort of, I think it was a combination of things. One is the way that I work and the way that Greg works, which is really convenient, is we sit down and go, yeah, we can finish this tonight. And then the next night you go, we can finish this tonight. And that's how you end up going crazy, but also that's how you finish a giant game in 30 days, is you just always think you can get it done. So part of it was we just, intentionally didn't know what we were getting into. But the other part of it is, as we were working on it, we started to realize what a special thing it was, and we did start adding a couple features to make it as filled with love as it ended up deserving to be.
I was wondering if it was scope creep, because one of the points up there was if you change your mind in the middle of,
right,
to not change your mind.
Right. Well, and I think that's like, all those points are ones that are functional to a degree on a certain type of idea. Like Spell Tower was, the initial concept was, yeah, just sit down and do it. But once you're in it, then you want to apply those rules to the decisions that you're making, but not to your entire project. I think it's impossible to do for an entire project. I mean, you don't want to sit down and work on something for 30 days and go, oh, that actually sucks. Which happens all the time and is really important, just to be able to sit down and do something that sucks. Because then you throw it out and you do something else.
Okay, all the way in the back.
Okay, so
spending a lot of time with Spell Tower on the subway, and I've noticed a sort of trend with Spell Tower and with Lose, which I actually played and trashed my computer, and it was great. And a whole bunch of your other games.
Wait, what was your score?
I don't even remember. I was just sad at the end. So I've noticed that you and a whole bunch of other, sorry if you hate this term, but art game designers, you guys tend to make like very sort of like high concept games with, like as you said, you get bored working on anything longer than 6 months. So, I mean, I've been looking at that, and I've also been looking at roguelikes, which are sort of the complete opposite in terms of design methodology, in that they spend like years on this one game that nobody gets paid on. And I was wondering how you feel in relation to that, to how you feel about expert play. Because I know there's something about Spell Tower. It's like a pretty deep game, but the point is not really so much to master it, right? Because once you've sort of figured out everything there is to figure out in it, then you know the game, and you're going to keep playing it, and you're going to keep doing it that way. But it's not like, say, Pac-Man, where somebody's going to be trying to like break the game for like 30 years with this sort of like absolute perfection. So I was wondering if it's like liberating for you to think outside of expert play, to not worry about like, you know, what this game is going to look like to someone who's already mastered it, or whether you are thinking about that and you're just trying to just like slowly work it in, and you just don't stick with something long enough to have to worry about that kind of thing endlessly and end up working on the same game for like 5 years.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think there are a couple facets, and I'm going to try to remember all of these. The first one is that I don't think I understand expert play. I'm fairly new to the games world still, and there's a lot of things that I'm still discovering. I don't think I explicitly designed for expert play, but on the other hand, I do think there's a huge degree in skill in the games that I make. Like, I think BitPilot, it's insane how good people can get. I would be shocked if there was an upper limit on skill in that game. I thought I was the best, and there are scores that like demolish mine, and I can't even imagine how people are getting those. But probably if I sat down and played and you watched, you'd be like, wow, how the hell do you do that? In Spell Tower, someone got over 2 million points, and they actually quit at 2 million points because they were like, well, I figured this game out, and I'm going to stop here because it's a perfect number. Somehow I got to 2 million points, and they played it for 6 months, one game, and then they said, I think I'm going to stop. So maybe there is a skill ceiling there, but on the other hand, nobody else has gotten anywhere near 2 million points, and maybe my imperfect understanding of words. You know, Spell Tower was a tricky game to balance because I was trying to balance how important is it that you're smart and know a lot of words, and how important is it that you have strategic ability, and like balancing those against each other was really tough. The other question, though, the other part of it, the roguelike part, is I actually don't think roguelikes are very different than the stuff that I'm doing. I think roguelikes just have more stuff in it. Roguelikes are extremely emergent. That's like the main characteristic. And the basis of most roguelikes, at least as far as I understand, is like there's a lot of small things that have very simple rules. Things will always do this thing when they're in this place, and if you put another thing with them, then they're going to interact in some really weird way. And I think that's very similar to how Spell Tower works and how all the other games that I've made work. It's about being able to totally grasp that system. And if roguelikes didn't have simple rules and their small components, then you wouldn't really be able to play them, because the entire point of a roguelike is being able to grasp as much of it as you can, but there's always something that's just out of your reach.
I think that's a good closing point. Thanks a lot, Zach.
Thanks.